In the heat of 1944, the German 12th SS Panzer Division reported a terrifying sight. An entire American armored division, hundreds of Sherman strong, appearing overnight in a valley that had been empty at sunset. They heard the roar of engines and the clatter of treads. They saw the dust clouds. They retreated. What the Germans didn't know was that if a single sniper had fired a shot, the tanks wouldn't have exploded. They would have hissed and deflated. The roar was a gramophone record, and the division was composed of fashion designers, painters, and radio operators. This is the story of the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, the greatest deception in military history. Chapter 1. The Recruitment of Shadows. The war wasn't just being fought with lead and steel. It was being fought with the mind. In early 1944, at Camp Forest, Tennessee, a strange collection of men gathered. Unlike
Chapter 3. Operation Bettembourg. The first major test came near the French-German border. The American line was dangerously thin. A gap existed that a German counterattack could easily exploit. The Ghost Army was called in to fill the hole. Under the cover of darkness, Arthur and his team went to work. They unrolled the tanks, deflated rubber skins, and used industrial compressors to bring them to life. In the moonlight, the shadows made the rubber look like cold, hard steel. They used bulldozers to create fake tank tracks leading into the woods. They set up fake heaters that put out the thermal signature of a real camp. "Sound on," the command came through the radio. The massive speakers began to hum. To a German scout 3 miles away, it sounded like an entire armored division was moving into position. The psychological effect was immediate. The German high command, believing they were outnumbered 10-1, diverted their reserve units to face a phantom. Chapter 4. The Price of Illusion. It wasn't all paint and speakers. The Ghost Army often operated within reach of enemy artillery. Because they were pretending to be a high-value target, they were often shelled. Arthur remembered a night in the Ardennes. The winter of 1944 was the coldest on record. They were setting up a fake headquarters when a real German patrol stumbled upon them. The artists had to drop their brushes and pick up their carbines. "The irony," Arthur wrote in a letter home that he knew would be censored, "is that we spend all day trying to..."
This was the largest deception of the war. Over 600 inflatable vehicles were deployed. The sonic trucks played the sounds of bridge-building equipment for 24 hours straight. The air was thick with smoke pots. When the real Americans crossed the Rhine elsewhere, they met almost zero resistance. The German guns were all pointed at the rubber tanks and the loudspeakers of the Ghost Army. Epilogue. The Silent Veterans. When the war ended, the men of the 23rd were told they could never speak of what they did. Their records were classified top secret. For 50 years, Arthur Sim's family thought he had been a simple clerk. It wasn't until 1996 that the documents were declassified. The world finally learned that a group of artists, armed with nothing but creativity and courage, had saved an estimated 15,000 to 30,000 American lives. They proved that in the theater of war, sometimes the most powerful weapon is a well-placed lie.
Chapter 6. The Architecture of Deceit. The success at the Rhine hadn't been a fluke. It was the result of a terrifyingly meticulous attention to detail. Back at their temporary base in a mud-slicked field near Verdun, Arthur Sim sat hunched over a drafting table, his fingers numb from the damp European chill. He wasn't drawing landscapes anymore. He was sketching the personality of a fake division. "A tank is just a shape," Arthur muttered to his friend, Pete, a former set designer from Hollywood. "But a division? A division is a mess." They realized that the German aerial reconnaissance, the dreaded Luftwaffe Stukas and Eridos, didn't just look for tanks. They looked for the signs of human life. Arthur's team began creating living debris. They hung laundry out to dry near inflatable trucks. They dug fake latrines. They even created trash out of empty K-ration boxes and scattered them in patterns that suggested a battalion had just finished breakfast.
It's the imperfections that make it real, Pete said, adjusting a camouflage net over a rubber jeep. If it looks too clean, the Krauts know it's a trap. It has to look like 500 tired GIs are living here, and they don't give a damn about being tidy. Chapter 7. The Ghost Radios. While the artists perfected the visual lie, the Sparkies, the radio operators, were fighting a silent war in the ether. Led by a soft-spoken genius named Sergeant Miller, the radio unit of the 23rd was tasked with spoof radio control. They didn't just broadcast random signals, they created entire networks of fake conversations. Miller had a team of actors who learned the specific speech patterns of real colonels and generals. They would broadcast sloppy Morse code, knowing that German interceptors would recognize a specific operator's fist, the unique rhythm of their typing, and conclude that a specific famous unit was in the area. One night, Miller sat in the back of a darkened truck, the glowing tubes of his transmitter the only light. Alpha 6 to Bluebird, he spoke into the mic, his voice a perfect imitation of a tired, irritable supply officer. We're missing 2 crates of ammunition.
Chapter 8. The Hedgerow Nightmare. The beauty of the Ghost Army was its elegance, but the reality was often brutal. In the bocage country of Normandy, the hedgerows, ancient thick walls of earth and shrubbery, made visibility nearly zero. This was both a blessing and a curse for the deceivers. Arthur's unit was ordered to draw fire away from a real infantry push near St. Lo. They set up their inflatable Shermans in a field surrounded by dense hedges. The plan was to let the Germans see the tanks through gaps in the foliage. Suddenly, the whistling started. "Incoming!" Arthur screamed, diving into a shallow trench. The Germans had spotted the decoys and opened up with 88mm artillery. The earth shook. Shrapnel tore through the air, shrieking like a banshee. Arthur watched in a mix of horror and grim fascination as a direct hit struck one of their inflatable tanks. Instead of a catastrophic explosion of fuel and ammo, the tank simply vanished in a pathetic whoosh of air. The rubber skin flopped onto the grass like a dead whale. "They're gonna know!" Pete yelled over the thunder of the next barrage. "Once they see that thing deflate, the jig is up!" But the German observers, miles away through binoculars and smoke, saw the movement and the dust. They assumed the explosion had simply knocked the tank into a ditch. They kept firing. For 3 hours, the Ghost Army sat under a rain of steel, pretending to be a target so that the real soldiers 3 miles south could advance in total silence. By the time the sun set, Arthur's hands were shaking so hard he couldn't hold his canteen. They had lost 4 tanks and 2 trucks, but not a single human life. Chapter 9. The Barmaid's Tale. As they moved deeper into liberated French territory, the deception moved into the towns. This was atmosphere at its most dangerous. Arthur and Bill Blass were sent into a small village near the front lines. They wore the shoulder patches of the 75th Infantry Division, a unit that was actually 60 miles away. Their job was to leak information. They walked into a local tavern, the air thick with the smell of cheap wine and tobacco. They knew the stay-behind German spies would be watching. "I tell you, Bill," Arthur said loudly, leaning over a glass of cider. "I don't know why we're heading toward Metz. The mud is waist-deep and the bridges are out. But orders are orders. We move out at dawn." Bill played along, rubbing his eyes. "Metz is a graveyard, Artie. I hope the tanks can handle the climb." They saw a man in the corner, a local farmer whose boots were too polished for a farm, quietly get up and leave. 2 days later, the German High Command shifted an entire panzer regiment to defend the road to Metz. The Americans, meanwhile, were actually sweeping toward the softer defenses of Nancy. Chapter 10. The Weight of the Secret.